Hello everybody, my name is Andrew. I'm on modernmilitaryhistory.com, Modern Military History YouTube channel, and at modmilhist on Instagram. This is podcast number 13 of the MMH Podcast. Today we'll be speaking with a veteran of the Second World War, a veteran of the 35th Infantry Division, Mr. James Graff. He is a combat veteran of the Battle of the Bulge and the advance into Germany. Mr. Graff joined the 35th Infantry Division late in 1944, the very early beginning of 1945, outside of Metz in France, and became a member of the 134th Infantry Regiment. Mr. Graff has some incredible stories to say. He is late in his 90s and a very amiable gentleman. I wanted to do this introduction to this podcast on my own because I wanted to just bring you guys up to speed on the fact that I tried to put together a Zoom call with Mr. Graff. He's currently in an assisted living nursing home, and I tried to coordinate with the nursing home facility to see if they could help him with a Zoom interview. That unfortunately did not come together. Thankfully, I just had a conversation with Mr. Graff over the phone. We had a phone call, so the audio quality of this interview is not typically up to the usual standards. I appreciate you folks, and without further ado, this is the interview with Mr. James Graff, 35th Infantry Division veteran of the Second World War. Here he is, and thank you, as always, for listening.
Whenever you're ready.
Well, I'm ready. If you're still interested, I'd love to talk with you about your experiences in World War II and do an interview here and put that up on my website if that's okay with you.
Okay, what do you want to know?
Well, where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Middletown, Illinois.
And what kind of town was Middleton?
There's about 500 coal miners. No, that was about all I had to do outside of farm work. There was a coal mine, and the population is run between 500 and 1,000. My dad was mayor for many years.
What year were you born?
He carried a gun practically every day.
What year were you born?
25.
That's 1925.
1925.
And did you go to high school?
I went to high school and 1 year of college before I went in the Army.
Did you play any sports in high school?
I played some basketball, but then we moved to the country and we had cows and milk and things. Then we had got egg in Middletown High School, and I got interested in that. And I didn't play only for about 2 years sports. I'm about 5.5 foot tall.
Gotcha. What year were you in school when Pearl Harbor happened?
Well, when Pearl Harbor happened, that was in 1941. I was probably about a freshman, because I was about 35 when I got out.
Do you remember?
My birthday is in August.
Do you remember Pearl Harbor?
Why, sure I do. Hell, I had a cousin there, Arnold Tabusic from Decatur.
What was your cousin doing? What was your cousin doing in Pearl Harbor?
He was in the Air Force.
Mm.
In the ground crew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he'd volunteered. He'd been in the military a year or so. He went in about the time the war was, before the war broke out, before Pearl Harbor. He was in the military when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. When did you join the Army?
I joined the Army when I got out of high school.
What year?
1944. I was in basic training when they invaded the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And I joined the Army shortly after Christmas of 1945. And I fought through, I had 4 months, I got 3 battle stars.
Gotcha. Where did you go to basic training?
Camp Hood, Texas.
What was that like?
That was tough down there. It was hot. And, but the good thing about it, I learned all the weapons. Later on, we got replacements that didn't know how to get a clip in an M1. Now, how much help was he going to be?
Do you remember anything, like what kind of stuff did you do in basic training? What kind of specific stuff did you do in basic training that you remember?
We got to fire all the small arms. I don't think we had pistol training, but we did rifle and BAR, and we didn't have a machine gun, a burp gun deal. But each battalion of infantry has got 3 rifle companies and a weapons company. ABC are rifle companies, and D is a weapons platoon.
Gotcha.
And D was always heavy weapons. Heavy machine guns, they were 30 caliber, but they were water cooled. The machine guns the rifle companies have were all air cooled.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a favorite weapon?
I was a BAR man practically all the time. That's a Browning automatic rifle, had a 20-round clip.
Gotcha. Did you qualify with the BAR in basic training, or did they give you the BAR later?
We fired the basic. We fired light machine guns and the BARs and M1s in basic training. The submachine gun that Dick Tracy used, you never seen one of them in the ETO. I think they carried some in the jungles in the Pacific, but we never we used M1s, carbines, and Browning automatic rifles and 30 caliber light and heavy machine guns, and 60 and 80 millimeter hand loaded
Mortars. Gotcha. How long?
Each rifle platoon, battalion,
Mm-hmm.
in the rifle divisions was 3 rifle companies and 1 heavy weapons. Like I was in 1st Battalion 134, ABC were all rifle companies, and D was the heavy weapons.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the heavy machine guns and the 81 millimeter mortars.
When were you assigned to the 35th Infantry in the 134th Regiment? When did you meet up with the division?
I met up with them in England. Well, no, we landed in England and went across into France and joined them in France.
Was this, when was this that you joined them in France?
Well, the replacements come in, you already bring them up at night, and they put them in the companies, and in the morning they divide them into a platoon or something. Listen.
Yep.
None of this was easy, and in camp in Europe, we had probably a dozen or so men in the company that couldn't read or write. Now, what the hell are you going to do with guys like that? They know how to get a tip of the M1, but they don't know how to write to their girlfriend.
Did you guys teach them how to read and write?
Oh, hell, I wrote letters for a lot of guys. I'd write, Dear John, or sign it. No. But, no, hell, we had guys out of Tennessee and Arkansas and Alabama and places. And, hey, the big cities,
Mm-hmm.
there were foreign-born people that couldn't write their own name hardly.
Wow.
Don't believe they was all hillbillies. They wasn't. There were a hell of a lot of them was Italian and German,
Mm-hmm.
and they couldn't write their own name in English.
Gotcha.
It wasn't, they want you to think that Roosevelt was the second coming of Christ. Son of a bitch, guys, if they got a chance, they'd have shot him.
Yeah. Were you...
And I'm not prejudiced because I'm a Republican.
No worries. Did you get drafted or did you join?
I signed up to be taken. And the war started, and see, when the war started in 1939, I was still in grade school.
Mm-hmm.
And I finished high school before I had to go to the Army.
Did you pay attention to the war when you were growing up, like in the news and everything?
Did I what?
Did you pay attention to the war when you were in grade school and going through high school?
Shit, I didn't pay attention to that.
Gotcha.
One of my dad's uncles had been in the World War I in the 90th Division. He'd been drafted and went to the 90th. It's from Texas. And I was in the 35th, and it was from Nebraska, in Missouri, and Nebraska, and maybe Iowa, I don't know. But I was in the Nebraska regiment, and the town my company come from was now I'm thinking of so many things I forgot.
It's all right.
But it was in the south central part of Nebraska. It was about the size of Lincoln Hill, or about 12,000 people.
Gotcha.
Beatrice.
Okay.
Beatrice, Nebraska.
So what did you think of France when you first got there and joined with the division? Were you nervous? Were you anxious? What do you remember?
I didn't know anything about them, and I couldn't speak the language. I knew a little German. My mother folks had been born in Germany, and I knew a little German, but I couldn't understand them, and the frogs were mostly people after somebody with money or something to give them.
Gotcha.
We did think a hell of a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they surrendered to the German shit. They threw the guns down and surrendered when the cops come across the border.
Mm-hmm.
We never got no goddamn help from them.
Right. What'd you think of the 35th Infantry when you joined them in France? What did you think of the division when you reached it?
Well, in my company, the only original men were in the kitchen. The men doing the fighting was like me. They'd been replacements. So if you're there long enough, something happens to everybody. Don't put your money on this shit about long lasting and everything. If you're at long lasting in the infantry, you're not in the rifle platoon. You're in the heavy weapons or headquarters.
Gotcha.
People don't realize that, but the rifle platoons, something's going to happen to everybody if it's nothing more than frozen feet.
Dangerous duty.
Yep. Don't let them shit you about this, that, or the other. If they were in a headquarters company, they seen very goddamn little action.
Did you join your platoon right away?
Yeah. I tell you, I was fortunate this way. I had basic training. I'd have 14 weeks of basic training. A lot of those guys that had 6 weeks been put in a truck company. Then they broke the truck company up and put them in the rifle companies, and they didn't know how to get a clip in an M1 because some of them had taken basic with an '03 Springfield.
Oh, boy.
And the people at home, hell, they don't know that shit. And you tell them that, and they believe what they see that John Wayne done in the movies, and he wasn't even in the military.
Right. So I'm curious about. I'd love to hear about your BAR. When were you issued the BAR?
Well, sure. I mean, there was about, I don't know, 2 or 3 dozen of us that joined Seat Company, and I think pretty near every one of them was in the hospital. I had an eye injury, and I was in the 105th evacuation hospital, considered Holland for about a week. Sent me back in the line. I was a BAR man big part of the time. Part of the time I was the platoon runner. We had some guys that couldn't read or write. There was probably more now then than there is now because after the war they insisted on them people having a grade school so they could go to school. Tell them people, them civilians, they don't give a shit about the military unless they got somebody in it. And I'm right now I'm president of the 35th Division Association. And I don't blame any of them, but I just, when a fella gets talking, I ask him what outfit he was in, and that tells you how much combat and stuff he's seen. If he's in a truck company, he hasn't been in combat, with a few exceptions. He drove a truck. That was his job.
Gotcha.
I was an infantryman. I trained with an M1, and I took the BAR much because people didn't like to carry it because it weighed 18 pounds and the M1 only about 8.
Right.
And my best friends were fellas like Robert Landrum from Honeywell, Missouri. He'd been a mailman before the war. Elwell Sanborn, he come from Laconia, Wisconsin, New Hampshire.
Okay.
I mean, Stephen Sokolowski, hell, he'd been born in the old country and immigrated here, and he worked in a factory, and I don't know whether it was Detroit or somewhere in Ohio.
Sure.
But those are the kind of fellows I was in the Army with.
When did you first see your first combat?
Huh?
When did you see your first combat?
it was right after Christmas, I think. I don't, 44.
Mm-hmm.
I was mostly in combat in 45.
Sure.
I joined 35th Division. I think it was late January of 45. I fought about 4 months with them.
Mm-hmm.
I had an eye injury and I spent about a week in the 105th Evacuation Hospital in Centered Holland.
Mm-hmm.
And they sent me back to the company. They always, if they possible, they always sent wounded back to the same company they were in. That was a good practice.
Mm-hmm.
That way, a guy that didn't get fucked up on what the people he'd been used to being with.
So I'm really curious about what it was like the first time you were in combat, the first time you fought the Germans. Are you able to tell me about that first time that, you know, you were hearing shots fired in anger and you're in combat? What happened?
Well, it was up in Belgium, and I tell you, probably at the time we didn't know what the hell town we was in.
Sure.
And the people couldn't talk to us, and we couldn't talk to the people. And people think the Germans was something out of the world. Those crowds were just like you and me. They'd been drafted into the army, trained, and fought for Germany. That's the way with us. We drafted into the U.S. Army, sent the basic training, trained, and went to fight the Germans and didn't know what the hell a German looked like.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I mean, people see these goddamn pictures and they think it's all fun. It's a dirty son of a bitch job. And I tell you, unless you've ever been shot at and you don't know how it feels. And maybe your best friend got killed. Got a leg, stepped on a mine, got a leg blown off. You can't glorize the goddamn combat. Nobody, picture shows and that stuff don't mount to a rat's ass when it comes to the real thing.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That's why I really think it's important to talk with folks such as yourself, because a lot of people who have never been there, who have never done that, claim that they know or claim to think that they know what it's like. I've never been in combat, so I can't say I know what it's like, but I really think it's important to talk with folks such as yourself who do know and are able to tell people their story. So I just want you to know, sir, that that's one of the reasons I really appreciate you just spending time with me here. This is really important stuff. I just really appreciate your time.
Well, I had a high school education and a semester of college before I went in, so I was pretty well read. But we had fellows from Arkansas and West Virginia and places. They didn't know really what was going on because a lot of them and people don't believe this shit. A lot of these guys couldn't read or write. I wrote letters for different guys, and one guy told me, I said, what do you want me to tell your wife? And he said, I don't care, just put in plenty of honeys and darlings. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, honeys and darlings. That was all he was interested in. So, but you'd put that in the movies, they'd think, who in the hell wrote that?
I have a question for you. When you guys were fighting in Belgium, was this in the Battle of the Bulge?
Yeah, I was in around Bastogne and a little town called Zimmerich.
Mm-hmm.
And but we fought, and we had I think 31 men in our company, or around that number, killed in Belgium. And probably 2 dozen or 3 dozen guys with frostbite. Frostbite knocked you out just as well as a bullet.
How did the frostbite start to take people out? Where was it? Their feet?
No, well, the snow, it was pretty deep in places, just like here in Illinois. Some get a lot, some don't get any.
Did you guys have good winter clothing?
It was warm. The trouble is, you can't do a hell of a lot if you got a lot of clothes on. The overcoat was fine when you was shacked up in some crowd house or Belgian house, but it wasn't worth a damn to fight in because it was get snow all over it, and that'd freeze, and that'd make it heavy, and you never went in. We never went in combat with the overcoat on. We always went in with a field jacket.
What kind of equipment would you wear in combat?
What kind of what?
Like, what was your harness, your web gear? What kind of equipment, your ammunition? What kind of stuff did you have to carry in combat?
Now, when I was a BAR man, I carried 12 magazines, which were about 4 pounds apiece, and I had a canteen. They had a little alcohol in it, and if you was a rifleman, you had a bayonet, and I carried the BAR most of the time, and it weighed 30 pounds.
Gotcha. Did you wear a pack? Did you have a backpack?
I had on a pair of a pair of short underwear, and a pair of long underwear, a pair of fatigues, and a pair of wool knees over them, and either a field jacket or an overcoat.
Gotcha.
Low cool food, stuff to keep you warm.
Gotcha.
And we tried to, when we dig in at night, they'd try to get you up some blankets. and you roll the blankets in 4 blanket rolls so a man can carry them. But we always tried to fight into a town at night. Instead of stay in the town all night.
Did you guys fight with tanks?
Oh yeah, the 35th was in armor with 6th Armored and the 4th Armored. They supported us all during the Ardennes.
What kind of tanks were they?
It was just Sherman.
Did you guys ride on the tanks?
Well, we did if we could, but it's the only time you ride tanks is if you're moving, and I tell you, you don't want to be riding a goddamn tank with somebody shooting at you.
Right.
I mean, they show that shit in the movies, but they never was in combat. I know guys that were in combat 6 months and never fired a round. I'll believe that if you want to.
Oh, I believe it. I believe everything you say.
We had guys that didn't know how to hardly get the clip in an M1.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
And some bastard in Washington, he thought he was smart, and he told that shit, and people thought he was lying to him.
I have a question for you. Did you ever take a town with the tanks, the Shermans, from the 4th or the 6th Armored Division? And what was it like to fight with the tanks?
You didn't want to be riding tanks when you're attacking because the crowd just shoots you off the goddamn things.
Mm-hmm.
The rival companies went in on foot, and the armor supported them.
Gotcha. So you guys would call the tanks to shoot a specific house or a strong point, and you'd just have them support you guys.
Trouble is, the tanks were generally an armored division.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't take orders from the 35th.
Mm.
So there was a little problem. But we liked them if they was up there because we could ride on them. That me waiting around in the snow.
Sure.
Because, see, we have 4 buckle overshoes.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you wear if the snow was at home.
Mm-hmm.
And I had on a pair of long underwear, a pair of short underwear, a pair of fatigues, and a pair of wool ODs. And an overcoat. But I didn't wear the overcoat in the daytime, tried to be where I could move a little bit. And I was very fortunate. I'd been in Camp Hood and took infantry basic. And many of them guys have been in cannon companies or quartermaster, and maybe had a bear training, and a lot of them with an 03 Springfield, and they was issued at a 30 caliber M1 bolt action.
Mm-hmm.
So you could See, I know fellas that went 4 or 5 months in combat and never fired a round. Because they never was in the position to shoot a crowd.
Sure. I have another question for you. When did you see your first German soldier?
Camp Hood, Texas, they were prisoners. They'd shipped over here. When I had basic training, they had all kinds of crowds at Camp Hood.
Gotcha.
They looked just like you and me. 2 legs and 2 hands.
And when you were in combat in Belgium,
Yep.
when did you see the first German that wasn't a prisoner?
Well, I guess the first day I was up there.
Gotcha.
I joined them outside of, they was in the woods in Belgium.
Gotcha. What happened?
Yeah.
Yeah. What
And,
happened there?
I had a little extra basic training because my mother had a cancer operation and I had an emergency furlough home and they sent me back with the basic. Might have saved my life.
How so?
Because when I got back up to the company, they'd been in training, and because I'd missed so much basic, they sent me back in my basic, and I took some of it over, and they wanted everybody to have 13 weeks of infantry basic. It's combat and stuff a hell of a lot different than the movies.
Mm-hmm.
You can't kill a man on the movies and expect it to look like a guy laying in the snow and the blood running out. And we didn't see so many of them because we were busy shooting and going on. Mm-hmm. That was the medic's job, was to pick up the wounded and the dead. They left them until the thing was over with. And they moved on through, and then they policed the Germans and the American dead. It ain't nothing like they portrayed it in the movies.
Would you be able to give an example of combat in the Ardennes in the Battle of the Bulge, so that people today can kind of try to understand what it might have been like?
Well, probably the first thing you got to remember, there's very few men take part in actual combat. There's a lot of guys, after the first round fired, you don't see them until night.
Mm-hmm.
And I know fellas that's been in combat for several months and never fired a round in anger. It's no bag up, shoot 'em up deal. If you get in one of them, it's rare. The crowd seems like everybody else. Hell, they didn't want to get killed either.
Sure.
That's the way with Americans. After the first shot was fired, you maybe didn't see half of them until night.
Sure. But as a BAR man, you had to fight though, right?
I had a automatic rifle that had a 20-round clip.
Right, and you had to be a fire support for the riflemen.
I'll tell you one thing with me.
Uh-huh.
I was a 19-year-old kid, and I had seen a few movies and stuff, and I tell you, I was fortunate this way. I had 23 weeks of basic training because I had a emergency furlough when my mother had cancer operation, and I got to go home, and I had to take 6 weeks of the basic over.
Mm-hmm.
May have saved my life.
Right. Right.
And it's no bang up shoot 'em job. I know guys been in combat 6 months and never fired a round.
Right. You mentioned that you got wounded in the eye. How did that happen?
No, it was concussion from a hand grenade. Crouched through we was in a building and it crouched through a grenade in there, and I got concussion from a hand grenade.
Where was do you remember where that was?
Oh, it was right after we first got into Germany.
Gotcha.
And you gotta remember, I was 19 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate. I'd been in Camp Hood and took infantry basic. We had a lot of guys that had trained with an 03 Springfield and didn't know how to get a clip in the M1. They set them on the line.
Wow.
They was used to bolt action Springfield. These goddamn guys in Washington running the thing, they knew about as much as shit.
Gotcha.
And it was like Roosevelt. Hell, he was crippled. He couldn't been in the military if he didn't wanted to.
Gotcha. When did you?
And,
oh, sorry.
We didn't. I tell you.
Yep.
If you wasn't in combat, we didn't listen to you at all.
Gotcha. So you guys were really tight-knit. The guys in your platoon, you guys, you were really tight-knit because you'd been through combat together.
Yeah. I still, Rick Storm, he was the squad leader. And I know him yet where he lives, and he lived in southern Illinois, and I lived in central Illinois. He lived in, I forget the name of the town he was in. But he was down about halfway to Cairo from Springfield. I was 30 miles north of Springfield. But I tell you, I felt pretty good this way. I had actually 23 weeks of basic training because I was about 6 weeks in my training, and my mother had a cancer operation, and I got a furlough home. When I come back, they put me back about 6 weeks into my basic, and I had to take it over. I always thought that saved my life, because the fellows that I did with, they was in combat 6 weeks before I got there.
Do you remember a time where you were in combat and you had a very close call that you almost got killed?
I had a man or two killed right in front of me. If he hadn't have been there, it had been me. And you never know. I mean, it's like you shoot at a guy. Maybe you hit him and maybe he dropped down and played dead. He was at a distance, and when you got up there, hell, he was gone. It's a hell of a lot different than the movies.
How did you deal with the stress? How did you deal with the fear of never knowing if you were going to get hit or not from 1 minute to the next? How did you get through that?
Well, some guys never get through it. And I was very fortunate. I was one of the youngest ones there, and I had delivered papers and had responsible jobs in civilian life.
Sure.
And I think that helped me. And my dad, he had been in the military in World War I. He was too young. And but Pop, he always taught me to, you got a job, do it. And I delivered newspapers in Middletown. That's a little town close here where we're at.
Uh-huh.
And I delivered papers, and I was used to dealing with people. Hell, I had fellows that couldn't read or write in those days. And don't let anybody kid you. We had fellows in the Army that couldn't read or write.
Sure.
And
sure.
There's guys that come to me and they'd say, Graff, help me with this here. I don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Hmm. And that...
But no, hell, the goddamn government, Roosevelt and them, he was a crippled son of a bitch. And he didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground about it.
Yeah. And that, so when you were, so having jobs in civilian life, having a dad who had been in World War I, and being able to see to the job at hand, if I'm hearing you correctly, that helped you with the stress of combat.
Two of my best friends in combat are Rex Storm and Robert Lander. And they were as different as day and night.
Really? How so?
Storm was he did a little screwing around on his old lady. I don't think Lander ever did. He had a shitty job in civilian life. I don't think Lander did. He farmed and carried mail. And you have good friends, and if we had a few guys, I wouldn't have given a kiss my ass for them.
So your friends helped you in combat?
Yeah.
Did they save your life?
kill a guy or two that might have killed me.
Did you save their life at any point?
Oh, I don't know. I was a BAR man. I wasn't proud of the people I killed. But, and I'll tell you, you don't know ones that you killed. You could shoot in the building and everybody shooting in the building. And you get up there and there's a half a dozen dead crowds in the building. Well, who shot them?
Sure.
I don't know whether because there was only one bullet, and
Yeah.
we wasn't giving a dead man any physical examination.
Sure.
I know guys that spent 6 months up there and never fired a rifle. People don't believe that, but that's the truth.
I believe you. So I have another question for you. When did you guys cross from Belgium into Germany?
Huh?
Well, when you're fighting in the Bulge, fighting in the Ardennes, you said you got wounded by a hand grenade, a concussion by a hand grenade right after you crossed into Germany. What was that battle like?
Oh, I don't remember this way.
Uh-huh.
I when I shot the BAR, it was generally in support of some guys going ahead.
Uh-huh.
And that's the way with the machine gun.
Sure.
We use them in defense, and they weren't much count in combat because you had to have the goddamn one man carried the receiver, another man carried the tripod, and 3 or 4 guys with ammunition, and you can't move 6 men at one time, hardly.
Sure. But the BAR only takes 1 man.
Yeah, I had 13 magazines.
Sure.
And the only time that I ever shot all of them at once was on a patrol.
What was that? What happened there? That sounds like a pretty serious firefight.
That was after the Ardennes, and we were on a patrol in Germany and come under some fire, and I decided to cover the rest of them and fired all the magazines but one. That's the only time it ever happened.
Gotcha.
So, and this bang went up to shoot him down. Hell, I know guys that have been in combat 6 months and never fired a round.
So going back, when you were wounded by the grenade in Germany, you said you were firing support with the BAR, and you guys were in some buildings.
Well, see, the Germans had a different. They had some hand grenades, but most of their grenades was explosive on a stick.
Gotcha.
And the crowd, they carried those in their boots or in their belt. And everybody in the American Army or infantry was, when they went in combat, they had 6 grenades. But I'd say half of them threw them away, because they didn't want the thing to go off. How many people were killed by one of their own grenades, I don't know.
Did you carry grenades?
Yeah, I carried, I think I carried about 6. But I was fortunate, too, that I'd had basic training. You got to remember that a hell of a lot of these fellas only had 6 weeks basic.
Yeah.
Drivers and them, and they cannibalized those outfits and put those guys in the rifle company, and a hell of a lot of them barely knew how to get a clipping in them ones.
Gotcha.
And people don't realize that. And I'll tell you,
yep,
there's a certain amount of guys after the first shot fired, you don't see them till night.
Gotcha.
And Rex Storm, he was a combat man, and John Semenick was my assistant, and I don't think he fired a shot neither.
Gotcha.
So there you are. But they don't show that in the movies, and they show all the bang up stuff and that. They mount a rat's ass. I bet you we had men that never fired around in combat.
Did you ever see German tanks? Did you ever see German tanks? Did you ever have to fight them?
Well, I see them. They come right up to the building we was in and fired in it. But,
oh, my God.
and Krauss, they had a good armored outfit, and those Germans, they were smart. Hell, they could operate them. I give them credit a lot. And, the thing that about it with me, I feel fortunate that the Lord protected me, and I went into combat and fought about 6 months, although the last couple was this kind of, we didn't fire much or do much fighting. We would just kind of going through the country. But I fought the biggest part of the winter campaign, the Ardennes, and I had about 6 weeks up there, and every time I get in a tight spot here in civilian life, I think it was worse in the Ardennes. And people, they see so goddamn many movies and stuff like that, and hardly any of them movies are accurate.
Sure.
They got guys that's shooting guns and throwing hand grenades and shit. I bet you we had some men that never fired around in anger.
Sure.
And after the first shot was fired, you never seen them till night.
Sure. I'm curious, when the German tanks came up and fired into the building that you were in, did you guys take casualties at that time? Did you guys suffer any casualties from the German tanks shooting into your building?
We scared to death. We'd was interested in getting somewhere where the shell wouldn't hit us. might have tried to knock them out with the bazooka, but a hell of a lot of us maybe just disappeared into the building somewhere, or run out of the building to another one. It's not a made up thing like the movies.
How did you get away from the tanks?
Hide in the building. They couldn't run over to the building. And the crowd, I tell you, those crowds had been fighting for years, and they'd survived, and they knew ways that they didn't do anything more than get killed than you and I.
Sure.
And you see these picture shows, you see guys that mowing them down. That's horse shit. They never were in bunches like that at all. And, it's a hell of a lot different than what the picture shows and stuff portrayed it.
So when the German tanks came in, did the American tanks have to push them back out? Do you remember what happened?
Well, the Shermans, they weren't armored as heavy as those German tanks, and they had 75 millimeters, and the Germans had 80 each on theirs. So they were outclassed day one.
Gotcha.
The Sherman wasn't on the same classes that Crown tank.
Gotcha.
You gotta remember, these here, a lot of those Germans had been fighting for years, and they knew something or they wouldn't have been alive. And the Americans, maybe some guys have been there 6 months and some guys 2 hours.
Gotcha. Where was the heaviest battle? Where was the heaviest fighting that you participated in?
Well, it was in the Ardennes. Because the hell was, once we crossed the Royal River, it was fight and run.
Gotcha.
Crowds shot at us and we ran into them and over.
What's one thing that people don't understand about fighting in the Ardennes?
Well, I tell you.
Uh-huh.
Everybody spent a lot of time trying to keep warm.
Sure.
And not fight. But you couldn't tell them that after seeing some of these movies and stuff. And the guys that put them on probably never fired a gun in anger.
Sure.
But we've had Americans, and I knew several guys. They never fired a shot. When the first shot was fired, they looked for a place to hide and stayed out of actual combat until the shooting was over with, and they came out then to eat supper.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I know guys in combat and never fired a round. I mean, they they was in rifle companies that never fired around. So
Did
it
you?
ain't the shoot 'em up, bang 'em up thing that you see in the movie or somebody shooting at you. You're going to take cover.
When was a time that you thought you were gonna die? When was a time that you were really scared and you thought you were gonna die?
My dad was the mayor of Middletown, and he carried a gun a lot. And I tried to, I had a little extra training because I had an emergency furlough. My mother had an operation, and they forced me to take some of the basic over. And that might have saved my life.
Yeah.
I didn't have to go overseas quite as fast as I would have if she had that operation. But the combat, people think it's a shoot 'em up deal. And I know fellas that never fired around. And some people were afraid. Some of them didn't want to clean their rifle.
Sure.
That was, yeah.
Sure.
I mean, people don't believe that, but that's true.
I have another question for you. When you got across the Ruhr, you said after you crossed the Ruhr River, it was not as much combat. Can you tell me what it was like to advance into Germany and what that was like, that phase of the war after the Ardennes? What was that like?
Well, my mother spoke German, and I was around. We had people around Middletown that could speak better German than they could English. And they never excited me. What I mean is, those crowds, they was wanting to live the same as I was. And
Sure.
and I was only 19 years old by then. And I didn't know much. And I'd had a little extra basic training, and may have saved my life. And I see these pictures, shows, and I think, I wish to hell it had been like that. And combat is something you can't describe or it's something you don't see regularly. I mean, you get up and go to the bathroom and you eat 3 meals a day, almost your whole life.
Sure.
But people, when these people were talking about combat, I always say that son of a bitch has never been there. And it ain't nothing like you think it is. And there's no getting around it, and it ain't going to change.
Gotcha. When did the war end for you? When did the war end for you?
On the 5th of May, when in the spring of 45 or 46, I don't know, whatever the last. We was in occupation a little while, but they sent 35th back to the States, and we were going to be on the invasion of Japan. But we never had to do that. And I spent some time in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in the regular Army, and then I got a discharge and went back to Illinois and went to college. Then I got married.
What did you go to college for? Or what degree did you get in college? What did you study?
Agriculture. And, well, I didn't study agriculture at Lincoln College because they didn't have ag but I transferred from Lincoln College to the University of Illinois and went there a year and took ag.
And in civilian life, after the war, after you got your degree, what did you do?
Come back to Middle Out and went to farming.
What kind of farming did you do? What did you farm?
Well, my dad inherited some land, and he moved. He didn't like the way they was run that Middle Out, so he moved to the country. And my mother and him and we moved to the country. And I got to helping farmers and stuff. And there was a guy by the name of Joe Wright that lived next to us. And I went to work for him, and I got acquainted with him and his son-in-law, Charlie Sunneth. He'd come up here out of Kentucky as a hired man and married the guy who was working for his daughter. And Sunneth he'd been in the First World War, but he'd been no combat either. And I was just off and on farming carpenter. We worked for LWS, so he'd been in the Navy in the First World War. I and the neighbor boy, Lawrence Dorgan, we worked for Wade Esto Carpenter along with farming.
I want to ask you a question, and I want to explain why I'm going to ask this question. I do a lot of work with guys, with veterans. We record their story, and something I always ask gentlemen such as yourself, guys who have seen combat and came back from combat, and lived as civilians. A lot of veterans commit suicide today. A lot of the Iraq, Afghanistan war veterans get really depressed. They commit suicide. 22 veterans commit suicide. And I think that's horrible, and I really want to help that. So what I do is I always ask people like you who have been to combat, I always ask them what they would say to a young man who came back from Iraq, who came back from Afghanistan, who saw combat, and is having trouble becoming a civilian again. What would you say to somebody who's having trouble, who is a veteran today?
Well, I think it's a state of mind. Part of it, I think, is from seeing war movies. They think they gotta act like Clark Gable or somebody like that.
Sure.
And I worked with fellows that could barely read and write. And I was in the Army with some guys that could barely read and write. And I carpentered and farmed. And my dad, he said, oh, hell, I wouldn't pay attention to so-and-so. He don't know that. Well, some of these guys that didn't know, they knew a lot. And Pop, he wasn't in the First World War. He wasn't old enough. And he was, of course, too old for the second. And we never talked combat or anything between each other because he wouldn't know what I was talking about. And you never know what anything is about until you experience it. And you can talk all, the cadremen can tell you all of this stories and all that stuff, but until you experience it, you don't know what the hell you're talking about.
If I may ask you, did the war stay with you? Did you remember the war? Did you have dreams about it? Did you ever have any trouble or problems after the war remembering the combat?
No, I learned it was like some guys, we go to sleep in a foxhole. Some guys never went to sleep, and some guys went to sleep as soon as they got in it. So that's the way I was. I had seen a little bit of everything, and I never paid attention to somebody unless I thought he knew more than I did. And if 90% of the people you talk to don't know as much as you do. And I come back from overseas and had a furlough. Then I went back in the Army because my time wasn't up. And I was in Kentucky in the Army, regular Army. We rode cars and trucks up to Chicago and had a big parade down Michigan Avenue, and we'd already paraded it in Paris, and maybe it was because I was just 16. I was about 18 years old or so when I got out, and I've thought a lot about it. I've been real active in the 35th Division. Now I'm president of the association, and but I never paid any attention to somebody that didn't know more than I did.
I think that's good advice for a young guy who, because I've met guys who they come out of the Army and they don't know what to do and they don't know who to listen to and what to do. It sounds like you came out, you got into farming, you got your degree, you got on with your life. I think that's really good advice because I really want to help veterans today. And hearing from somebody who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, saw some serious combat, had German tanks shoot into the building he was in, and hearing somebody who've done those things come out the other side and carry on with their life and live to an old age, I think that's an important story to hear.
Well, I think so too, and you can pretty much tell by a guy that's been there and a guy that ain't. Some of them, if he knows everything, he ain't been there.
So stay humble. You got to stay humble, it sounds like.
Yeah, and guys that's been in a lot of combat, they don't talk about it. And it's like me. I never talked about it unless I was talking to school kids or something like that, and really thought wasn't they impressive. You have a 20-year-old man or 25-year-old man has a hell of a job trying to impress somebody that's 50 or 60 years old.
I'm 26. I'm 26 years old, and I love the fact that you're spending time telling me and telling the people who listen to my veteran interviews about your experience, because we have so much to learn from you, and we have so many questions because we don't know what World War II was like, and World War II veterans won't be around forever. So it's
I know.
So I so appreciate you spending time with us, telling me about your story, and I really appreciate you taking your time to answer my questions. I asked you a lot about the war because we can't be there because it's in the past. So the only way we can try to understand, and we can't fully understand it, we'll never be able to fully understand it, but the closest we can get is hearing real people such as yourself tell us your thoughts, your experiences. So my hat is off to you, sir, and I so appreciate you. I just want you to know that this is so wonderful. I really appreciate you, sir.
Well, I try to tell them like it was, and like I say, somebody said, "How'd you get along with the German civilians?" And I said, "Pretty good, especially the women." And the crowd, you take the crowd women, a lot of them, they're even if they was married, they had got to spend much time with the husband.
Gotcha.
And it's, I tell you, this war ain't like portrayed in movies. There's a hell of a lot of time spent doing things that you think just don't mount to a rat's ass. And I can listen to a fella for 10 minutes and tell whether he'd been in combat or not.
Gotcha.
Well, I appreciate talking to you.
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to be going back to Middletown here as soon as possible.
Gotcha.
And you later, buddy.
You take care, Mr. Graff. I hope you have a great day. And again, thank you so much for your time. You rock. I so appreciate you. And thank you for what you did for our country in the Second World War. Thank you for what you did afterwards. And I'll talk to you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, sir. Take care.
This has been podcast 13 of the Modern Military History YouTube channel, Modern Military History Podcast on Spotify, across the internet. Any way you can get podcasts, I'm sure you can find the MMH Podcast. We've done other interviews with other veterans. We're going to be doing more interviews with more veterans. As I told Mr. Graff in the interview, it's talking to real folks who have been there, who have done that, who can give us a little bit of an understanding of the true nature of war and the history of conflict. Modern military history is all about making the history of conflict accessible to people so that we can better understand the true nature of war. It is I, Andrew, with modernmilitaryhistory.com, ModMilHist on Instagram, and don't forget, check out the second channel, Modern Military Gaming. It has the Beer Cast, which is an informal podcast where I drink a beer, talk about the day's events in history, and talk about whatever I want to, loosely based around military history. It's the informal channel, Modern Military Gaming. Thank you, as always. I can't tell you how much it means that you folks are joining me on this journey. This is my passion. This is what I want to do. If you have any questions, please send it to themodernmilitaryhistory@gmail.com or leave a comment in one of my YouTube videos. You can send me an Instagram message. Whatever you want to do, I would love to do Ask Me Anything segment of the Beer Cast, and for that, we need people to ask me things. So please feel free to reach out. This has been Andrew, modernmilitaryhistory.com, Modern Military History on YouTube, Modern Military Gaming on YouTube, at ModMilHist on Instagram. Thank you so much, everybody. You take care. Have a great beginning of June. Today is June 5th as I record this. Tomorrow is D-Day. So, in remembrance and absolute gratitude for what men like Mr. James Graff did for us and getting his story out here. It's also a partnership between me and you. It won't happen without you listening. So, thank you for listening. Take care, everybody. You have a great one. Bye-bye.